We good to go, folks? We are perfect to go. Well, kia ora, g'day, hello. Thanks for coming. Super boring topic, so are you sure you're in the right room? I mean, it's okay, I'm not going to be embarrassed if you walk out now. So yeah, we're going to talk about porting, really. There we go. So who am I? Obviously, it's just another generic middle-aged white man on stage, and it's like, gosh, have you seen enough of those already? But I mean, I've spent 20 plus years doing ports. I've spent almost 40 years in the industry, which is why my hair is going. So I've worked at all sorts of places in the UK and in Australia, and I do a lot of work here in New Zealand. So I've managed the production of cross-platform games for Team 17. So stuff like Before We Leave, Dredge, Moving Out 2 and Conscript that you might be familiar with, plus a bunch of other stuff. And I've worked with a lot of indie developers who plan and deliver ports. Also, a little bit of a career highlight in making Henry curl up in the fetal position when he asked me how crossplay would work for Abiotic Factor. Excuse me, I'm getting over a little bit of an infection, so I might be a little bit slow today. So, why port? It's a fair question. If any of you have ever come to my pitching workshop for code, you'll know I constantly bang on about maximizing your addressable audience. And that's basically who can play your game, who can buy your game, how you can make some money. I'm a big advocate of localization for that, but another way to maximize that is to go to other platforms. If your game isn't on a platform, people on that platform simply can't buy it. If you're only on Steam, you really are missing out on a whole audience. So that's one reason to port. Another one is the long tail sales revenue. Something that I talk to developers about a lot is that it's great, everybody gets excited for launch and wish lists and all that kind of stuff. But honestly, I'm not saying that's not important, but honestly, most of your revenue is in the long tail. So that's after you've released. And so you're in sales, you're in festivals, you're in bundles. That's where you're really going to make your money, and we will talk about that. So we call that lifecycle management. That's something that indie publishers can do very, very well. You can do it as well, but it's effort. That's great on Steam, but if you're on more platforms, you can do that on more platforms, and that helps a great deal. And one of the things that I want to see for indie developers is that you've got this ongoing revenue, that it's not, you don't just have your game, you sell it, thanks very much, move on, that can provide sustainable income for you for literally years to come. And again, we will talk about that a little bit. And the whole catalog sales, back catalog sales revenue, if you look at a publisher like Team 17 or Devolver, where they report, because they're publicly listed, they report where their revenue comes from, you'll see 80 to 90% of their revenue is from catalog sales. So that means that games that are not new. That is a vast amount of money, and you need to be getting in on that. Also, there's credibility and cool points for going to consoles, let's be honest. If you have the chance of going to JB Hi-Fi or EB Games and seeing your game on the shelf, how cool's that, right? That's pretty cool. Anybody can launch a game on Steam within reason, but it takes a lot more effort to launch on console, and you will learn a lot. And if you're going back to publishers or investors, the credibility that you've got because you've been there, you're a real business. There's a whole load of benefits to it, not just the cool points. So I'm a big advocate of that. So what can you port to? I mean, obviously, I talk about consoles a lot. Consoles is the obvious thing. And Switch has been fantastic for indies. If you talk to any indie developer, they will sing the praises of the Switch. It's fantastic for indie games. Obviously, we're all excited about Switch 2, but I don't think we need to rush to it. It's quite difficult to get Switch 2 dev kits at the moment. The games that are getting them tend to be things that are using the camera or the mouse mode or something, so that they're in short supply at the moment. But remember, anybody with a Switch 2 can play your Switch game. And you would be a fool to ignore the Switch. There's 100 million or something out there. It's like crazy. So it's nice to go on the new platform, but it's not absolutely essential. And we had the same thing when PlayStation 5 came out. Because it was backward compatible with PlayStation 4, you've still got that huge market. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. PlayStation 4 and 5 are still worth looking at. Xbox is a difficult one. If you're porting to all platforms, it probably doesn't cost that much more to go to Xbox, but realistically, The question you get the whole time is your game on Game Pass? And if it's not, people don't buy it. Xbox is not the best platform for indie games. I think they're trying to change that, but they've just managed to create this situation where people are paying for Game Pass and they expect all the games for free. If you can get a Game Pass deal, happy days, right? And you can do quite well. So I know the Brews and Bastards guys at Moon Studio recently launched on Game Pass. Very, very happy for them. That's great. In terms of the PC stores, there is the Windows Store. Honestly, the only reason to do that is if you've got a Game Pass deal and Microsoft are making you. Hands up anybody who's bought a game on the Windows Store. That's far more than I thought. It's a dreadful experience. GOG and EGS are both interesting. You will see less than 10% of your sales on platforms that are not Steam on PC. So it's up to you. If you want to do it, sure, but just you're going to be supporting those forever. Other PC-like platforms, stuff like Mac and Linux, it's fan service. Again, you're going to see a very small percentage. If you're into those, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not your real dad. But in terms of making money, nobody's really making money out of Mac and Linux. It's goodwill is what you're getting. And then mobile. Mobile has gone through a lot of changes in the past decade. And it tends to be, again, there's the Apple Arcade or Netflix or Google Play Pass for subscription stuff. Other than that, with premium, it's been difficult. It's tended to be very big indie games, so the like of Dredge and Unpacking that have gone to premium on mobile. So it's not ideal. So this is one of the questions I get asked a lot, how much will it cost? And it really does vary. So it could be tens of thousands of dollars if you've got a fairly straightforward game. So single player, and you're not having to make a lot of changes to the art or controls. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know, maybe you're going online, maybe you've got cross-play, we get scary with that, and maybe there are substantial art and control changes, and then you will literally be paying millions of dollars if you are porting a high-end PC game. I don't think any of you are doing that, but I'd love to be proved wrong. You've likely got online cross-play, likely significant art and control changes to take it to console. You know, this is more the AAA stuff, and you're probably not playing in that area. So whether you're paying that or whether you've got a publisher, somebody's paying it, and then you've got all the associated QA and compliance, submissions, all that to go to. So there are a few different sort of porting scenarios that I wanted to talk through whilst I'm here today. And so different projects might have different approaches to this, and there are good reasons. So my kind of favorite, if you like, and my go-to and where I came from really is doing sim ship, and that's kind of exactly as it sounds, like you ship on all platforms at the same time. It's most often, this is going to be if you're working with a publisher. So you could do it and self-publish, and the folks at Team Cherry obviously did that with Silksong. But you need to be super organized, and you need to have the money, and the chances are most of you don't. Of course, you have to remember you've got console submissions, there's time involved in that, extra QA, all that kind of stuff. And it is best for a v1.0 release. If you've got a PC game that's in early access, that's fine. You'll see there's a lot of games when they exit early access, go to 1.0. That might be when they go to console, and this is why. I think this way you can hit the broadest possible market at launch. If you launch everywhere on every platform, you get the maximum bang for your buck in media, with marketing, all of that stuff. It's great. You can sell to everybody. Maximizing everything, awareness, fantastic. But it's not the only way. There are alternatives. So we'll give the example, the classic example, I guess, of the sim ship. And it is a small team with Black Salt Games here in New Zealand. And I did produce this, so I'm talking from experience with this. So it was their first Steam game. It was single player, it was offline, it was Unity, and they did Steam and Switch, which was the smartest thing they could possibly do. So they were doing the high end, and they were doing the low end with Switch. So fairly obviously, if you can get the game running on Switch, trust me, PS5 isn't a problem. Happy days. What I did with that was I used the PlayStation, Xbox, GOG, WinStore, and EGS ports. I got that in Australia. And we did day-and-date release, and we did retail as well. So we were doing it on hard mode, but we had the money of Team 17 behind us. And I think you all know that went quite well. So, yeah, good story. That's my preferred way of doing it. But it's not the only way. You might also have what I would call staggered ports. So you might be launching on one platform, possibly two platforms, and it could be for exclusivity reasons. So a few years ago, I was working with a developer back in Brisbane, Australia, called Prideful Sloth, and we did a game called Yonder, the Cloud Catcher Chronicles. So Sony had put some money into that, and part of the condition of that was, whilst they weren't publishing it, they wouldn't let us take it to any other console platforms. So there was an exclusivity period of 9 months, which was fine, that worked out. They didn't mind us putting it on Steam, and funnily enough, it sold more on Steam, so happy days. But we couldn't take it to Switch, we couldn't take it to Xbox for another 9 months. Sometimes with developers, it's because of available people or kit. Switch kits weren't available when we were trying to launch Yonder anyway, so it was fine. So it might not be that the staff, sometimes it's done, as I say, early access titles going from PC, launching into 1.0. And Abiotic Factor is our local example of that recently. They spent maybe a year, maybe a bit less, in early access on Steam. And then, as you know, they launched cross-platform on Xbox and PlayStation with 1.0. And indeed, here it is. So again, not a massive team over in Dunedin. So they're published by PlayStack over in the UK. They were playing things on a slightly harder difficulty mode because they were doing online. So it was an Unreal Engine game. And they actually used a US-based porting team. I spoke to them extensively before they started. That's when I made Henry cry. And they were planning to go cross-play. There was a whole bunch of things they had to do to change to basically get the game to work across consoles with online. There's a world of pain, or there can be a world of pain with cross-play, and I think Henry's experienced most of that now. PlayStation got involved, and this is really why it came to console. So they worked with a couple of contractors in the US, and that time difference worked for them. I'm a big believer in having people local, but because the game existed, it was a different job than trying to do a simultaneous ship. So on Dredge, where every release, every update, every DLC was in lockstep, Abiotic Factor, the PC game continued whilst it was being ported, nobody knew, and a lot of it was behind the scenes. So the fact that it was in a different time zone was far less of a concern. So they had one contractor that was dealing with all the kind of standard stuff, all the cert stuff, getting it to work on the console, and then another guy working really hard on the networking, the crossplay, all that sort of stuff. So then we've got another scenario, which is your post-launch ports. And that might be that you never really intended on having a console port. Maybe you're testing the waters with additional platforms. But there can be some difficulties there if you've never planned for it. So the example we talk about is Before We Leave, another fantastic New Zealand game that was originally on the Epic Games Store exclusively. And then when they decided they were coming to Steam, Team 17 got in touch and said, hey, can we do the Steam release? And how do you fancy consoles? We can get a Game Pass deal. So that's what we did. This happens quite a bit. You'll see this with a number of titles that they are successful. They find success on PC first, and then they look at consoles to expand their market. Sometimes there will be games are finished on PC, and so then it's not an ongoing endeavor. There are no more updates, there's no more DLC, but there's like a complete edition. And that's actually a little bit easier. If you're trying to keep in sync, there's a lot of extra work there. So with Dredge, for example, we were doing updates. We had planned updates, we had planned DLC. So there was ongoing work. With something like Before We Leave, it was much more of a, we do it, we're done, there was an update. So the ongoing commitment was quite different. What you do have is there's potentially issues if you've not planned for it in terms of your controls or in terms of your performance. And you sort of can't overlook that, and you shouldn't overlook that. So I think potentially you end up with more work for the port than you would have if you thought about it from day one. So again, Blissfully Before We Leave was a single player game, which makes things, you remember from the slide about costs, that makes it easier and cheaper. It was offline, Unity, all good choices. What we did have, Team 17, before I got on board, they'd hired a porting team in the UK. I'm in Australia. Balancing Monkey Games are in Dunedin and London. There is no good time crossover, and it was a massive pain in the arse. The porting team were great. They did a good job, but it just made it hard. It made it harder than it should have been. The other thing was that Sam and the team They never imagined the game would be as successful as it was. They never imagined it would go to console. So they hadn't even thought of console ports. They'd not thought of controller. And if you've played Before We Leave, lovely, cozy city builder, it's a PC game that relies on a mouse, a keyboard, scroll bars, dialogue boxes extensively. So there was a huge amount of work, design work and then implementation work to make that work with a controller rather than have just a virtual mouse. That's something, if they had looked at that earlier, it would have saved a lot of time and it would save a lot of money on the port. The upside is Microsoft money. Game Pass is what paid for it, so happy days. All good. I spoke to Anna before doing this talk, really to get her take on, like, well, how did it go? Because it was never planned, and it's all a bit of a bonus. So 3 years later, they are still seeing revenue from the console ports that they didn't even do. So they've got this revenue that's coming in, this passive revenue that's coming in, because Team 17 are still selling copies of the game, not just on PC, not just on Mac, but on Switch, on PlayStation and on Xbox. And again, I talked earlier about the whole lifecycle management thing. They're doing sales on it. There is like an indie publisher like Team 17 has a team of people in the sales department that plan. It goes in this Steam festival, it goes in this sale, it's on discount here, but they're doing that on every platform and they are there to maximize that revenue. And it's made a real difference to the Balancing Monkey Games team in terms of how much money they've had in. It's fantastic to see them seeing money after 3 years. My friends at Prideful Sloth back in Brisbane, they're still seeing significant revenue from Yonder after 7 years. And that's just them on their own. And they've got that across a bunch of platforms. So that's 7 years, like having revenue 7 years after you launch your game is incredible. And you would all take that in a heartbeat, I'm sure. So then finally we get to these opportunistic ports. And this is where I think you need to exercise a little bit of caution. So I've seen this, and I don't have an example with a developer because they don't want to be doxed, and that's fine. But most often it happens where like a third-party publisher will come up and say, hey, we've seen your game on Steam. We could take it to Switch for you. And like, yes, they could. It's mainly Switch. Sometimes it's different markets. It's like, hey, do you want to go on this random Korean PC store? And you're like, maybe. Sometimes they're full-service publishers, but more likely they are specialists that this is their business model. They take games, maybe they've not been the most successful games on Steam, and they eke a bit of revenue out of it, and then you see something as well. So it could be a Hail Mary for you if the game hasn't gone as well as you need. Maybe it's attractive because you could see some money in the bank. Could be free money if you're done with it. But really be careful about what you're getting into because the reputation is yours, not theirs. So if the Switch port or whatever is horrendous, they're blaming you, not the porting company. And you really want to be mindful of your reputation, particularly as you're going on to try and secure further funding, further projects, all that kind of stuff. And the other thing to check is whether it affects your Steam SKU. You don't want to give up control of your Steam product because somebody is doing a publishing deal on Switch for you. Retaining that for yourself, if you're not already with a publisher, I would say is hugely important. So the experience that some developer friends who do not wish to be named had, they did get approached for this. They did do a Switch port. They did launch. They said the port was fine, and they said it like that. And they said, but the problem was the publisher had absolutely no appetite to do any updates to it. And so then you end up with this situation where your hands are tied because the publisher's like, oh, well, we're not going to update it. We're done. And you're like, but we want to fix these bugs. And there's another developer I know who there was a PS5 port done. There were bugs that made it crash. They had to withdraw it because the developer who did the port disappeared. They had to withdraw it from the store and refund everybody. And that's your reputation. You don't want that. And I don't want that for you. So, how do you plan for ports? And I would really like you to plan for ports. I mean, the data's in and it's like you haven't, but you're here today, so hopefully we can help you retrofit some of that. I like to plan from day one, and you're probably beyond that, but never mind. Your engine choice is very important. Unity, Unreal, and GameMaker are relatively straightforward to port with. I've ported with all of them. Other engines could be a red flag. They could be a red flag for funding. They could be a red flag for publishing. I understand, yes, I know somebody's going to tell me that Balatro was written in the Love engine. I am well aware, but honestly, with enough time, determination, and money, you can port anything. There are clients I know who have ported Flash games to PlayStation. I always like to try and quote Jurassic Park where I can, and I will, and I'll say, just because you could, does it mean you should? The answer is no. So I understand why people will use Godot. I understand why people will roll their own engine, but that is a deliberate choice, and that's going to affect your commerciality of being able to port to other platforms. And all of that is going to affect your long-term revenue. So you need to take that in mind. Again, not your real dad. We'll do the DNA test, but you've got to make that choice for yourself. The publishers that I work with, I'm scouting for and that I'm producing with, they would feel better if you're using an engine that has a proven path to porting. It's less risky, there's less cost, and they have trusted porting partners even, that they can use that will get you to market. And so that's actually a very, very big thing. Also, you need to think about the plugins and the APIs that you're using with whatever your chosen engine is, and making sure that they work. Primarily, that's stuff like your input management, so your controls, your dialogue systems, and your audio. If any of those don't work on other platforms, you've just got a massive problem. I would say most of the reputable things on the app stores and on the plugin stores will, but absolutely, please double check so you don't get a fright later. The other big one is like making sure your UI works on a PC screen, but then that it works on a TV and that it works on a handheld. So what works on a PC monitor does not necessarily work on a TV. Doom Eternal, the 2020 game, fantastic game. Clearly, they never played it on a TV. I was sat on the sofa in front of a 55-inch 4K TV, and the text was just ridiculously small. Don't do it. If you're supporting Steam Deck, you also need to get the game running at 1280 by 800. So again, your UI has to scale anyway. There's a lot of stuff that you can do around scaling your UI for those kind of resolutions. And with Steam Deck and other handhelds coming to the fore, you really need to. There's a market there. So you also need to consider your safe areas around the edge of your screen. And I would say, like fonts and UI scaling option, that's just good accessibility, right? You should be doing that anyway. Yes, it's a load of work and it's a pain in the arse, but it will really pay dividends, especially when you're trying to look at different resolutions. And then, sit a couple of meters away from a telly and see like, oh, can I read that? Because the chances are that you can't. Other thing, and I will always advocate for this, is controller support. Do it even if you're not planning for consoles right now. Again, Henry from Deepfield Games tells me that a few years ago, and it's very unlikely if you've met either of us, but we got drunk apparently here at New Zealand GDC, and I badgered him to implement controller support, and that's the only reason it happened for Abiotic Factor. I have no memory of that, and he's saying that's because I was drunk, but whatever, it worked. But do it. Absolutely do that. It's really key to it. It's actually more important now because you've got Steam Deck. And believe me, you want to get that approved on deck tick. So you have to support at least that. And if you're doing it, why not go the whole hog? Also, I'm awkward. Any developer that's ever worked with me will know that I plug a PlayStation 4 controller into my PC. And if you're showing me Xbox buttons, I'm going to scream at you. So update your glyphs. You can do it, right? It's just work. Another thing, consider your haptics and vibration for console. So, the haptics is obviously for PlayStation 5. You may not be able to do anything with it on any other platform. But if you think about it, it's those kind of things that make your game stand out. And if you're, like we talked earlier about how Switch 2 dev kits, people who are using the unique features of the hardware are getting kits. You're going to get attention from Sony. They're going to be more interested in you if you're supporting the haptics and the feedback and all that kind of stuff, because all of a sudden you're a PlayStation game, not a PC game running on a PlayStation. So think about that. Consider all your UI. It's not just your player controls, so your menus, your options, all of that stuff. And I would say that control remapping you should just do as part of accessibility. It's expected. It's not a luxury anymore. And it's honestly, again, if you plan from day one, it's not super, super difficult. Your graphical fidelity matches. We talked earlier about how Dredge was the great example where they did PC and Switch, so it was going to run on anything. It's a great model to do. A high-end PC a high-end PC game doesn't work well on a Switch or even a Switch 2 without a bunch of work. You need to consider that. If you're making a super high-end PC game, maybe you're only going to PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. right? You're possibly not going to switch. But you've got to think about how much you're trying to push on the screen, because it really matters. The other thing, we found shaders, even though like Dredge ran very, very well on all platforms. I think it might have been Xbox where one of the shaders had to be recompiled, had to be changed. It was going mad. There's always going to be something. You've got to take it into account. So you've got to be across all of that stuff. Another thing is your asset management. On PC, obviously, you've got all the memory in the world, really, and you've got so much. Your hard drives are enormous. It's not the same on PC. Consoles simply don't have as much storage. There was a game released on Switch, LA Noire. The day one patch was bigger than the storage on the Switch. You literally had to buy a memory card to update and do the day one patch. Don't do that, right? That's a horrible experience. So you need to map down to what is practical for that platform. And then obviously on consoles, the whole idea of like updates is a very different prospect to Steam, I should say, particularly on Switch. So you need to look into that. It used to be on Switch that if your patch was over a certain size, you actually had to get a waiver from Nintendo. I think they've relaxed that a bit, and I'm not sure what the Switch 2 rule sizes are, but it really involves asset bundling in Unity. I don't know what the equivalent in Unreal is, but like to ensure that every time you do a patch, it's not enormous. That is a massive thing to think about, and if you get it wrong on day one, you are with that for the rest of that product's life. There was a Unity game I worked with where the technical director was like, oh, no, I'm not bothered about that. Every single update we did, even if we were changing one line of text, was a gig, and we had to get a waiver. And it's like, oh, God, I told you. So the performance, it's a long time since I coded in Anger, but like, look, be frame rate independent where you are. Your game may run at 60 on your PC, but if it only runs at 30 on Switch, how does that affect your game if you're relying on a particular frame rate? Also consider lower screen resolutions and frame rates if that's what's going to make it work. It's very, very common on all console platforms now to have adaptive frame rates, adaptive resolutions to maintain frame rates, and you should be looking at that. And your memory usage in general, again, on PC, you've got all the RAM in the world. On consoles, you absolutely don't. So you need to consider what's in memory at a time. So again, that comes back to your asset management and asset bundling and what have you. The other thing is memory leaks. So when I worked on Conscript last year, that was in GameMaker Studio. We took that to every single console. The developer, who was a first-time developer, he didn't know how many memory leaks he had until we tried to get it running on console. Because it leaked just a little bit here and there, and your PC will cope with it, and the consoles were falling over. So we had to get on top of that very, very quickly. But on PC, who cares? You're used to it. You'll get a blue screen once in a while, and you'll start again, and everybody's happy. That's not the same on console at all. So the success of your port, or otherwise, it's not accidental, and a lot of it has to do with your choice of porting partner. So I kind of want to talk about what you should be looking for, and also if you have a publisher, if they're choosing providing ports for you, the questions that you should be asking to make sure that you get the best out of it. So, I mean, if you are working with a publisher, the chances are that they will have a preferred porting partner, but regardless, you should do your diligence. So very simple things like, have they ported to your platforms before? If it's their first time on that platform, that's a cause for concern. I think at the moment with Switch 2, that's almost universal. There are very few companies that have done it. But, that's what it is. Have they used your chosen engine? What can they point to? And what have they shipped? Because a lot of the time, the porting teams that you work with, they're not very high profile. You won't know them. Outside of somebody like Nix's that do the sort of IDOS ports and what have you, you've probably not heard of them. But ask them to show you what they've done. And check it out and see, is the quality there? Would you be happy if you'd bought that game? I think on the checking with the platform specifics, and again, this is something I caught up with Nadia about at Black Salt Games before I came here. And she was like, look, making sure that they can support you with the DualSense, with the touchpad on PlayStation, with the haptics, the audio, so the microphone and the speaker in it and all the lighting. And then on Switch 2, stuff like mouse mode. Remember, nobody's going to remember or nobody's going to care that you didn't do the port. You're the indie studio. You're the name on it. It comes back to you. So doing some diligence early really is going to help you. So yeah, as I said, the Dredge ports were really good. I mean, I project managed the heck out of them, and I think a lot of people didn't even realise that Black Salt didn't do the ports at all. They didn't do the PlayStation or the Xbox version, and honestly, that's the ideal solution. If somebody just plays it and goes, "Great, it was cool," that's what you want. Making sure that your porting team supports everything that you want to. There were some things that we wanted to do with Dredge that we didn't manage to in terms of the ports. And you sort of think now it's like, well, would you look at mouse mode, that kind of thing, and making sure that you can do all those. I would always talk to developers who've used them. So when you're talking to a porting partner, find out what games they've ported and get in touch with that developer. My experiences with this, developers want to tell you. They want to tell you if they've had a good experience, and believe me, they want to tell you if they've had a bad experience, because they don't want you to go through the same thing. Again, because it all reflects back on you, check the review scores. Did these ports, do well, or was it like, oh, this is a, lazy port, quote, or, does it run poorly? Check the reviews. It's very easy to check on these things. From a staffing point of view, will you have a dedicated project manager? Do you have somebody that you can deal with day to day? That day-to-day content is absolutely essential, in my view. And then what time zone are they in? So who are you going to be dealing with, and what time of day are you dealing with them? Here in New Zealand, if you're trying to deal with the UK, it's really quite unpleasant. That's a big reason why Team 17 started working with me down here to basically provide a better service to Australian and New Zealand developers. And after the Before We Leave experience, where we had a porting team in London, I'm like, we're not doing this again. I'm getting porting teams in Australia or New Zealand to support these developers. So, you've got to think about it. Maybe you're happy staying up till 2 a.m. to do calls. I suspect you're not. I'm not. But it's up to you. But it's certainly something to consider. I mean, it's something you would consider with your publisher anyway. So Jordan, if you're familiar with Conscript, Jordan was a first-time developer. It took him absolute labour of love. World War I horror survival game. It took him 7 years. It was his first game ever. It was in Game Maker Studio. In the end, I ended up with code in it. We took it to everything. So people they sometimes be a bit down on something like Game Maker Studio because it seems a bit low tech. We took it to PlayStation, we took it to Switch, we took it to Xbox, we took it to GOG, we took it to Epic Game Store, we took it to Windows Store. Day and date, I think we had it on 7 platforms. He learned a hell of a lot. He was on his own, blissfully. He's a fantastic guy. He took so much on board. So with Conscript, again, we had the memory leak issue, and the porting team were like, yeah, look, we've tracked it down, it's leaking here. And he's like, oh my God, because he'd never had to care about it. And again, trying to get it running on Switch, the porting team actually came back with a whole bunch of optimizations that he could integrate into the PC and make the PC game run better and run, smoother. And that's about having the right relationship with that porting partner. And the fact that I had them all in Discord, we were all within 2 or 3 hours time zone of each other. And we would talk every day. We would get builds every day. Hugely beneficial. So he learned a lot out of doing it, and the game was better as a result. And for me, that's a win. So, of course, you can make life hard for yourself. Using it on standard engine, it's not impossible, but it's going to take longer and it could cost more. So you sort of got to think about that. Online play is always going to get more expensive on the porting side, on the compliance side. Different platforms have different technical standards around online play. And then if you start to get into cross-play, well, players love it, but from a development point of view, it's a pain in the arse. Oh, my God. You need to figure out how players can connect, because you've got players on Steam, you've got players on PlayStation Network, you've got players on Xbox, all of that. Some folks will use the Epic Online Services as a solution. That's one. So when I produced Moving Out 2, we had 7 platforms that we launched on, day and date. I had 4 QA teams working on that around the world. I had 7 platform builds per day to test. Every combination of Switch and a PlayStation, Switch and a PlayStation and a PC, it gets massively expensive. The daily QA matrix was insane, and I spent hundreds of thousands on QA for that game as a result. So cool, crossplay, but think about, there are a lot of complexities with it, and there's a lot of costs too. And then, your ops costs could go up because you cannot do peer-to-peer across platforms. On PC, obviously that's super easy, but you need to do either relay or you've got servers or something. And so it gets just exponentially more complicated and expensive. So that's why the costs of ports go up as well. It's a real quote, and it's an approved quote. About the fact that it's not in a non-standard engine, but obviously it is online and it is cross-play. And they started out with one strategy for their online because they were PC only, and that worked fine. And then Henry started talking to me about we're taking it to console, and I'm like, are you sitting down? And we talked about how that worked, and he did curl up on the floor and he did sob. The upside is they did it right, and they were doing it post-release, so they had some luxury that they were doing all these changes behind the scenes whilst the PC game was carrying on and making money and making lots of money. And then they actually had a very successful launch. So it worked out for them. But I think if they had their time again, they would probably think about it differently and earlier. We talked a little bit before we leave about how new UI and controls can affect the time and the cost of a port. There was a bunch of work on that with the consoles that the porting team had to do. So there was designs for how you would control things with a controller, and there were designs also just to implement, and then you've got to test it. It just made it more expensive. It made it take more time than it should have done. There was also with Switch on that one, there was a tiny bit of art rework that had to happen. And that can get expensive. And then you start getting these inconsistencies between the platforms, and it's a thing to manage. The ideal is that you can use the same assets across all platforms, or that you've got a base set and then you can have more complex. Simplifying things can get complicated. The other thing that will increase your cost is if it's a short deadline. I need it done now. That's just what it is. The other thing that I would caution there is if you need it done quickly, your quality is quite likely going to be impacted as well. And again, we're going to come back to that's your reputational damage. So giving yourself enough time for the ports to be done properly, it may cost more in the short term, but it will be far better for you. So finally, we get at why I've got the clickbait title, and I do like one. So all the planning and preparation is to set you up for success, but your port is not done the moment you launch it. None of your games are done the minute you launch them. In fact, it's just beginning. So every game these days, when was the last time you got a game and it didn't have a day one patch? It's just the way that it is now, despite best efforts. So you have to make sure that's costed for, and that's scheduled for, budgeted for. If you're thinking you're going to launch your game and you won't have to patch it, I'm afraid I have bad news. You're going to need to have a day one patch. Plan for one, even if you don't need one. Plan for one, cost for one, make sure that your porting team is available to do it and that you've got budget for it. The other thing as well is you need QA and submission. So it all comes back to you need to have an approved version a lot earlier than your release date so that you've got the opportunity to do a day one patch. You also want to get, if you've got an ongoing game, if you're planning on doing updates, if you're planning on doing DLC, then you really want to make sure that your porting team is going to be available. You don't want to switch port teams partway through. You really don't. And you want to get pricing for that as well so that you don't, all of a sudden the price does, you don't want the price rising when it's like, oh, actually the game's been successful, right? So our price has risen because you need us now. You don't want to be in that situation. And again, with the whole updates and doing post-release patches and quality of life things, this is where the sort of opportunistic port that we talked about earlier could be problematic. So do watch out for that. If you're launching a complete game, maybe it's not a worry. Something like Dredge, we had, I think, 3 or 4 post-release free updates planned. We also did quality of life patches and we did the 2 DLCs. And we planned and we had the same porting team in place for all of them. The situation with Before We Leave was a little bit different. And I think there was maybe 1 console patch, but the games weren't in sync. It was not the ideal situation that I would like. Yeah. So the final thing to talk about really is the idea of bringing your ports back home. And that's depending on your game, but you might want to wind down your porting team because you don't need them anymore, but also you want to bring that expertise in-house. So that I would very much recommend you become a registered developer if you're not already. I mean, I think during a porting process, even if you don't do the ports, you should become a registered developer so that you can see the ports, because that's going to get released and you want to be happy with it. I think also having Kit and having access to the pipelines and being able to build your own ports for the future just makes sense. Again, there was a developer I know, the port was done, they never got the source code, so they couldn't fix the issue and they had to withdraw the port. Don't do that, right? So you want to bring it back home. So it could be for maintenance. It could be like after the hard yards is done. You know, if you've got your game running and it's cross-play and everybody's happy and it's like, okay, we're just cranking the wheel on giving you content, maybe you can handle that internally. That's something you might want to sort of consider. Again, making sure like dev kits, but also all the middleware licenses. So anything that your porting team is using, make sure that you have got access to it so that you can do a fresh build and continue to work on it. It's absolutely, you shouldn't cut ties with them entirely. Don't burn your bridges. You never know when you're going to want to talk to them again and have that, you know, knowledge. I'm talking to Henry at Deepfield that this is where they're going with Abiotic Factor right now, and that's a great sign for them. So they said they plan for support through 1.0, but both the main porting contractors are moving on to other products. But they've got the flexibility to help them, and you know they've got a price in place and what have you. And once they're satisfied with the stability, they'll just lean on them as consultants as need be. And that's a great situation. And you know, Abiotic Factor is such a good story anyway, but the fact that the way that this has all worked out is just absolutely perfect for them. They've been very smart about it, and I hope you will too. So you've listened to me drone on for far too long, so thank you for your time. Some of you are probably in the wrong talk. But obviously happy to take questions, and then I'm doing the clinic outside, which is about porting, not just your general medical things, but you know, whatever. Thank you. And apologies for the croaky voice. Any questions? We have a microphone so that it will all be recorded for the YouTubes. Go on down at the front here, John.
What are your thoughts on using staggered ship as a marketing beat, you know, essentially a way to reinvigorate sales post the original release?
Could you say using?
Using staggered ship.
Oh, staggered
marketing beat.
So, I mean, I've actually, when I worked on Yonder, that worked very well for us, to be honest. When we got to launch it on Switch, there were people, because the game looked, because it was quite a cozy looking game and it looked like it would belong on Switch, we had a lot of interest from people. And the minute we announced it, they were losing their minds. And so we got a lot of pre-orders. It can work really well. Kind of depends on the game, but it's like, I'm not against it at all. I think it can be very, very successful. You know, it can reinvigorate. You know, obviously you've got the whole sell that new platform, but if you do a discount on the PC game, perhaps, you know, you can then leverage extra interest there as well. So, sure.
G'day. What would you say is the most difficult platform to port for?
Well, I guess it depends from what, like from PC. I mean, it's going to be that there are, from a graphical point of view, if you have to make changes, it's going to be Switch every time, right? And potentially online as well. Switch's online infrastructure has always been finicky, shall we say. It's a very different beast than PlayStation or Xbox. So that can get quite difficult. There are differing standards across all of the platforms, especially to do with online. And so that can become problematic. But while Switch is, you know, like can be difficult, it's probably, for most indie games, it's probably where the most opportunity is as well.
The Steam games obviously can run on Steam Deck regardless of whether or not they're verified. But if they are verified, that's a great selling point on your Steam page. Do you have any thoughts or advice on how to get to the point of Steam Deck verification? I understand it's not immediately available, right?
Yeah, you submit for it. So it is a submission like any other sort of console submission. And thankfully, over time, Valve have got better at laying out the guidelines for what will and won't be approved. So even if you don't submit for it, they will eventually check and they will give you a rating. We had with Dredge, our text size was fine. I know they're very finicky about text size in terms of what minimum pixel size it can be. We were fine with that. There was one graphic that overlapped the corner of a letter, and they weren't going to fail us. There's no fail, but they weren't going to give us the best rating. So we had 7 days to fix that, and we fixed it, and then we got it. Yeah, but I mean the documentation's there. It's all very straightforward. It's not a mystery anymore. Cool. If there's no more questions, and that's fine, then I can let you go. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your conference, and thank you for having me.